Now, tell me about the Edward de Bono Foundation. Is that a way to take those ideas? Some of these ideas require sort of bigger political leverage, I suppose. Is it a way to get the ideas on a wider stage?
The answer is yes. And in education and so on, there's so much I can do to make these things happen. I mean, there are some countries like Venezuela, by law, it's in every school. So the Chinese government is trying out my work in schools in 5 provinces, and if they like the results, they may introduce it into 680,000 schools. So in certain countries, certain areas, there's a lot happening. Other countries, it takes a lot of work to make things happen.
In the past, you've been quite critical of conventional education and universities. Is it something which you think really should start as soon as a child goes to school and continue all the way? Or do you set them up early and then they're sort of self-supporting?
No, it should start very early. You can start as young as 4, and it should continue throughout education. You see, most of our existing thinking in education is knowledge and analysis, not enough operacy and design. And what happened historically is when the Greek thinking, the GG3, the Greek Gang of Three, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, came into Europe at the time of the Renaissance, schools, universities, and thinking were in the hands of the church. They were not interested in perceptual thinking because everything was set up as acceptance beliefs. They were not interested in design thinking or creative thinking. What they needed was truth, logic, and argument to prove heretics wrong. So that became the core of Western culture, which is very good for finding the truth and good for science, but not any good for creating value.
Do you think different people have different limits, though, in the extent to which they can pursue creative thinking, or do you think everybody has a similar ability to unlock that capacity?
The answer is everyone has the ability, but it's like any skill, whether it's playing tennis or skiing or cooking or doing maths, there may be a range of skills, but everyone can acquire a basic skill enough to produce good ideas, yes.
Going back to the university, in the autumn of last year, the Centre for Creative Thinking opened as part of Manchester Metropolitan University, which, as I understand it, is a first to have a university department. Tell me about that department and how it works.
Well, this was set up through the efforts of Bob Rawlinson and his team, and it is the first, and I think it serves a very useful function in centralizing some of the things, make it possible to happen. And also, Manchester Metropolitan University is, I think, the biggest trainer of teachers in Europe, something like 30,000 a year. And having that direct contact with the training of teachers is very crucial.
And presumably your hope is that then becomes a model which is extended to other institutions worldwide.
Yes. I mean, there are universities around the world who are doing my work. The University of Pretoria has an Edward de Bono Institute. The University of Malta has an Edward de Bono Institute. But this is probably going to be more active than any of the others.
When you look back over the last 40, 50 years of your career, do you feel sanguine about the progress that has been made in people's ability to absorb these ideas and to generate new ideas as a result of them?
Well, yes, in the sense that you're talking about 40 years. We're looking at 2,400 years of our existing culture of thinking. So that's a very short time for things to happen. And it's happening in several countries, like Venezuela, by law, it's in every school and so on. Singapore, Malaysia, very wide use, Australia, Canada, and so on. So a lot is happening, and I'm always getting stories of people who read my book and said that changed their lives and so on. There's a fellow in Ireland, and he said at school he was so dyslexic, the teacher put him at the back of the class and said, "You're going to spend your life digging ditches because you're useless for anything else." According to him, he read one of my books, changed his thinking, now is a very successful businessman. Came over to London to tell me. And always getting feedback from these sort of people. So a lot has been happening, yes. I mean, a lot more needs to happen, but a lot has been happening.
As I mentioned, you've been writing for a number of decades and you've got an extensive oeuvre. And I wanted to ask you, finally, if you might pick out maybe a couple of books from that oeuvre for people to start, the best place to start to really get to grips with your ideas, and maybe an idea to leave people with that would help them on the right path, as it were.
Yes, obviously there's a number of things. If you're really interested in what's this all based on, then The Mechanism of Mind is a fundamental book. In other words, I'm no longer just playing with words, but for the first time, perhaps in human history, looking at thinking as a result of how the brain works. But that is not a how-to book. It's not a book which an ordinary person would say, read. But if you really want to say, what's it all based on? Yes. Then the six thinking hats is very directly on the use of the six thinking hats and how to use that process and method. Then for creativity, the best would be serious creativity, but that's not so easy to get. Then there's books like Lateral Thinking or Lateral Thinking for Management. Then with regard to children, there's Teach Your Child How to Think and so on. So there's a number of different books depending on your needs.
And maybe a final idea to stimulate people to think creatively. What would you want to leave in people's minds in order to kickstart that process?
Yes, what I would like to leave people in mind is imagine you're driving a motor car and you really drive pretty well, and someone invents a new gear to do something very special. You'd say, gee, I want that gear. So why not in our thinking, where we've been trained in our logic and analysis and reason, and someone says, look, I'm going to help you to be creative. You should say, wow, I'd like to add that gear to my existing gears.